All right, we should be live. Hey everyone, it's Neil here from EDM Tips for this week's Tuneful Tuesday. I am excited as always to get into another round of these track feedbacks. For those of you tuning in for the first time, this stream is a chance for us to get some live reviews of track submissions from members of our Radio Ready program in the EDM Tips Accelerator. What I'll do is I'll play a couple minutes of each track live on this stream and be providing my feedback right on the spot. So if you're interested in getting feedback on any of your music, all you need to do is be part of one of those two programs, and every single week you'll get access to this stream. You can learn a little bit more about those programs in the link in the description below this video. We'll be talking about it a little bit more throughout the stream, but for right now, I'm just excited to dive in. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get into these submissions. So, first up, we've got a track submission coming from Tommy G out of our Radio Ready program. And Tommy is saying, Will made a tutorial on how to make classic trance, so I made this one. Please let me know what else I can do to improve to sound better, and is the low end better this time? Second part of the song is almost identical as first, so you can skip it. Thanks. All right, Tommy, let's see what we've got going on with Euphoric One. Guys, as always, as I get started on the stream, if you please let me know that my voice and music volumes that you guys are hearing are balanced well enough against each other. I can otherwise make any changes that I need to. Alright, so good compositional start going on here, Tommy. The first thing that I'm noticing is that everything seems a little bit distant. I don't quite have present information. So what I mean by that, I want the vocal to be a little bit louder, have a little bit less reverb applied directly to it. Same thing goes for like the main lead that you have. If you could just get that a little bit louder and more present, that'll create this nice foreground element for us to be able to focus on. Now during a breakdown like this, it sounds totally fine. So one of the notes, or like broken chords in that arpeggiator sequence right there, had a little bit of a diminished relationship to it and was just a tiny bit too tense. I would check out the notes in there and make sure you aren't playing any diminished chords in that little section right here. Vocal that you've got right now has just a tiny bit of like low mid buildup. I think the best way to fix this, given that you just need more volume on in general too, is also just to add like an upper mid range EQ around like 3.5 kilohertz or so, using the coloring EQ ideally, and that should get that vocal to sound really nice and present and checking my subwoofer levels here. I do think you could get a little bit more power out of the kick and sub bass. Now the balance between them is really solid. They're just a tiny bit low in general, so you could probably bring those up a little bit. Otherwise, I'd say, yeah, you're in a really great spot with this one, Tommy. So let's give it up for him with Euphoric One. And up next, I got a track submission from Yaniv coming out of our Accelerator program. He's looking for feedback on the break and drop at around 220. He says, I fixed the basses, and is it now getting the golden stamp of approval? Thanks. Yeah, let's see what we got with the updates to Through the Silence. So you need one thing I'm noticing kind of throughout here is that there's a pretty significant volume difference between these two, especially for it being mastered. And it was a little bit quiet to me just to begin with anyway. So I would just recommend some volume automation to bring up the volume of all of these elements. Probably another like 5 decibels or so, just across the board anyway. sounding really nice right now, you know? Cool, the drop is sounding really nice. The timing of the I can hear your voices seems just a little bit off to me. I want the word voice to land on the downbeat. So if you're getting like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 1, you should kind of have the I can hear your voice coming in between the 3 and the 4 so that it can feel in on like I can hear your voice, and that voice is the downbeat, the 1 of the next minutes. Energetically, this drop is working really, really nicely. The sub bass sounds really nice. You've got a great relationship going on there. I think we could get a little bit more thump out of the kick itself, though, so it might be worth just bringing up that kick a little bit in the mix, especially in the low end. Nice. Final thing is at that moment on that last through the silence, I'd recommend a little bit of like an echo or a reverb throw on that vocal just to help kind of carry us out of the drop and give us a little bit of a smoother transition into the next section. All right, let's give it up for Yaniv with Through the Silence. Up next, I got a track coming from Sean out of our Radio Ready program. And he's saying, hey lad, I widened the high-end ARPy sounds, added some saturation and compression to the drums, and moved the note of the perk sound like you suggested. Is it Mambo number 5 yet? Yeah, let's see what we got with a bag of cans. Great groove from the start. Those claps could probably use just a tiny bit more volume. They're a little bit quiet and distant in the mix. Pretty small thing there, though. Good use of reverb and space. The one thing I would suggest, so this feels like, like kind of like a DJ intro and extended edit sort of thing. But this track length sitting at around like 4.5 minutes isn't quite long enough to have this long of an intro. So I would probably cut this intro in half, and then just kind of get to the meat and bones a little bit more quickly. Of like jarring tones between the bass and this like mid-range lead like layer that are playing. It might be worth either redoing the bass or those mid-range notes so that they align a little bit more closely with each other and share similar notes in common throughout. Listening to this new ARP that's come in, and that and the bass are working well together, so I would just change the mid-range layer that's been playing kind of in this section earlier. It's that same sound that's just starting to come back in right now. Yeah, there is a little bit of a discordant sound going on The other thing that might be worth looking into is a slightly more kind of high-end textured bass sound for this section. Now, in this mid-section where you have that other ARP like lead layer coming in, you're totally fine. But here, the bass is carrying the majority of the attention. And it's got a little bit too soft and rounded of a tonality to truly carry it down. All right, well, great work overall. The mix is sounding way cleaner and a lot better. I'd say the biggest thing to focus on are those tonal differences between that, mid-range bell-like layer and then the bass and the ARP. All right, up next, I've got a track coming from Ian out of our Accelerator program, and he's saying, I got feedback from Adrian and Anjuna Beats, and while he told me I've got a decent song, he gave me a few technical critiques regarding my mix and mastering. Let's see, what else do we have? My only time-specific question is regarding the build, roughly at 250. He said it got a little bit too noticeably mono. I tried what I thought was a cool mono squashing effect, and apparently it's too much. Could you possibly lend me some advice on whether this technique could hypothetically work and how I might achieve the effect better? He also remarked that nothing pops out in the mix. I'm missing warmth in the low end, and everything feels dry and preset-y. For me, this is a pretty big win that the only real critiques he has are technical and not musical. What do you think about his assessment? Thank you very much. Yeah, let's see what we've got with Wisteria. Great groove and composition from the start. Mixing wise, I do kind of understand like right away what he's talking about, and like that lack of presence or something popping through the mix. Everything seems a little bit distant, a little bit wet with like a room reverb sort of tone. So I might suggest dialing back some of your reverb layers just to kind of dry those up a tiny bit and give it a little bit more presence at this particular stage. But then for some elements, give them a little bit more of a distant long tail hall reverb so that we still maintain that sense of space and the overall mix doesn't feel too like dry. In terms of getting that pop, I would also take like one of the elements, like one of your main lead elements or the drums, and just add a little bit more upper mid-range and high-end EQ boost to them to help give them a little bit more pop. Another thing that's going to help here is just volume differences among your elements. Right now, you can hear everything pretty clearly, but I think you can make, certain elements just a little bit louder, like the drums and particularly this kick, while also simultaneously, like, maybe dialing back the volume of your pads and some of your effects just a small bit, and that'll create a stronger sense of dynamic range in the track as a whole. Check out that build at around 250. I'll take a small. Cool, so I definitely like what you did and what you're going for. I would agree it got to be a little bit too mono, so you can still achieve this effect by bringing things mostly mono, but not by bringing them all the way down the stage. So I would just dial back the amount of width reduction that you have in that build, because your drop is still so wide that it's going to contrast and stand out no matter what. So if you just do a lesser extent of this build narrowing, you should be in a good spot. Finally, he mentioned he's missing some warmth from the low end. I would agree with that. I'm not quite hearing or feeling the bass in this track that I want. Now, if I really boost my subwoofer, I can feel a little bit of a sub bass in there, and that's a good start. But I would recommend increasing the volume of your sub bass and then adding a low mid bass layer in like the C1 to C2 range. That really gives us a lot of warmth, a lot of body and power to this track. Compositionally, though, I do think everything else is working really nicely. So yeah, you've got a great track on your hands here. Up next, I've got a track coming from... Okay, well, actually, I had a submission from Alex Illinois, and he was mentioning, or he kind of had a question, how many percent am I now when it comes to percentage? 50%, 70%? And Alex, unfortunately, I'd have to hear another snippet of your music to answer that properly. If you could just, submit again next week, but include a link to your track, I'll be able to let you know. So the next track submission is coming from Paul out of our Accelerator program. He's looking for just some general feedback, so let's see what we've got with this one.
When I saw you again, I knew I wanted you.
Great start here. Good vibe, good use of open space. Just a little bit. I think you could probably get some more power in the bass line that you've got here, right? If you just add some extra saturation and some volume to it to help thicken it up and really drive the track forward. Cool. So, Paul, compositionally, you've got a great track here. The biggest thing for me right now is that the elements are kind of, a little bit distant and flat in the mix. I don't quite have anything like really popping out, really powerful in our face. The good news is, like, the fix for this is relatively simple. You just need to come in and saturate a lot of your elements a decent amount further. And I would focus on saturating things like the leads, the drums, and the bass line, but leave any of like the background effects, fills, and that sort of stuff largely untouched. Vocal could probably come up just a tiny bit in volume as well, like a couple decibels would do the trick. The other thing is you've got a really nice like very low end between the kick and the sub bass, and then the upper mid range and high end is sounding really nice. I am lacking a little bit of body in like the 100 to 300 hertz range though, so I would probably, kind of similar to the last track, focus on adding a low mid bass layer here that just gives us a lot of power and more. Awesome. Nice kind of end to that drop and opening up into the breakdown here. Yeah, loving this. So really great work, Paul. Let's give it up for him. Really quickly, Jono, I see you just commented in the chat. You were wondering if you could submit a track still. Tell you what, go ahead and submit it for Tuneful Tuesday. If there's still time at the end of the stream, I'll get to it. If not, you know, I'll naturally have to wait till next week, but might as well submit and we'll find out. All right, so up next, we got a track submission from Rajesh coming out of our Radio Ready program, and he's looking for feedback on the first drop at around 125. So let's see what we've got with Modulus. Just a little bit of the build beforehand, too. Great open soundscape here. This is really nice. Love that, like, you know, very flowy section with the lack of any defined beat coming straight into the kick drum and groove here. That was a great transition. Great work on the low end. The kick and the bass relationship is fantastic here. So far, so I'm having a tough time identifying things that I'd really change about this way. Okay, you finally gave me one thing. The groove of this fill right here in these final moments of this drop was just a little bit off. I lost some of that beat. Now, to a degree, that's okay because you're intentionally getting out of that groovy rhythmic drop, but I think a little bit more tightening there could help out. One other thing that I think you could possibly do is create a little bit more top-end bite on either this like main like mid-range bass like layer or that distant harp layer. We're hearing them both clearly enough in the mix, but they're both filtered and muted enough that neither of them are really grabbing our attention. So the only present set of elements in here is the drums. For the most part, again, like that's mostly okay, but I would just recommend a tiny bit more presence and bite in, again, either that harp player or that bass, just so that our ears have something else besides the drums to latch onto. Awesome. All right, well, really nice work here, Rajesh. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would do. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of this. I think you've got a really good track on your hands here, Rajesh. So up next, we've got a submission coming from Noel out of our Accelerator program, and he's wondering if the saturation and reverb on the lead vocals sits well and if the sub bass has the right volume. Yeah, let's see what we've got with Back to You demo. Good start. Tiny bit of delay on this piano might help just kind of fill in some of that space and add to some extra interesting rhythm in the intro. I do think that the kick could come up just a little bit in volume on the top end of the kick at this point. It's just a tiny bit lost to some of the other information. That vocal reverb is sounding really nice. Same with the saturation on it. The one thing I would say though is that it's pushing it back in space a little bit. So on your reverb channel for that vocal, I would just side chain it pretty heavily against the lead vocal so that we maintain a little bit more dryness and presence on the words themselves. But then as soon as that vocalist is finished saying something, let that compressor, dial back. So have a pretty fast release so that that reverb then comes back into space. Of your kick has a great thump to it, good groove going on here. One other thing I'd love to hear, or I guess see in this, is just a tiny bit more presence out of the hi-hats. So if you've got Decapitator, putting that on E mode and just barely pushing that into the hi-hats would be a nice touch. In terms of the sub bass, I would say that your sub bass level is sitting really nice in here. It's got a great relationship with the kick. Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing to focus on will just be getting a little bit more presence out of those vocals as a whole. Cool. And then a little suggestion from Jono in the chat, thinking the piano would do well with another layer. So just adding in perhaps a slightly lower voice in there as well, to just help give a little bit more body. I do agree there. All right, so good work, Jono. Up next, we got a track from Mr. Gabriel in our Accelerator program, and he's saying, "Hey Neil, in the EDM Tips community, hope you guys are going well. Made this melodic techno track inspired in Afterlife recordings, following the sound of artists like Tale of Us, Anima, etc. So hope you guys like it. For the feedback, I want to know the mix, the music composition. You can always start the track at 58 seconds to avoid the long intro." Awesome. Yeah, let's see what we got with Dark Meets Light. Lovely start going on here. I think I'd like just a little bit more evolution in the sound design of this ARP throughout this section, maybe opening up the envelopes a little bit more so that it just lasts a little longer.
Are you ready to fly?
Really nice pre-transition and drop. I'm actually going to play that one more time because I was talking over most of it.
This is where dark meets light. Are you ready to fly?
Yeah, really like that. That was a fantastic transition moment. So the first thing that I'm noticing listening to this, you've got a great top end of your kick that's cutting through the mix, it's driving the beat. The low end, I think, could come up with just a little bit more power because it is the core and really the attention-grabbing piece of this track. Now, if you had a bunch of other chords, melodies, arps, and that sort of stuff, I think you'd be in a good spot. But because the bass, the kick and the bass here is driving this track forward, we just need a little bit more out of it. Love this wide lead that you've got. The drum pattern that you have is working really well. Would like a little bit more thickness on those drums, so some extra saturation on them in general, and perhaps a little bit of parallel compression to help bring up some of the tail end information in those drums a little further. I like the distant percussion that you've got in there too. I think that's all working well. There's one layer in here that isn't quite fitting for me, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. It sounds like there's like this very faint muted synth layer, like this low mid synth layer. It's like playing da-da-da-da-da-da. See, it just faded away. Yeah, it's got some sort of pattern, like a. It's tucked in the background, and it's really quiet, so it's not presenting a huge problem, but it is taking away a little bit from the vibe of the rest of the track. I'd honestly suggest just getting rid of that particular layer, because you've got enough going on in your other elements, and with the right extra bit of saturation and compression on them, especially, you know, as you get into the mastering stage, I think you'll have plenty of, you know, power and energy and interest in this track without that other layer. Okay, it's a perk element for sure. Then yeah, I would say just, you know, honestly get rid of that particular perk and you'll be good. Awesome. All right, fantastic work here otherwise. Let's give it up for Gabriel with Dark Meets Light. Really nice vibe in that track. Up next, we got a track submission from Maxwell Young out of our Accelerator, and he's saying he's looking for feedback on the overall vibe of the track, please. Was going for a Steve Smith Neptune's feel with this one and practice my sampling. I have started with the spoken word vocal and built the track around that. Incorporated a little ad-libs here and there and thought that it complemented the vocal in order to tell a story about lucid dreaming. Possible if the track could be played at least up until 2:30, I would appreciate it. At that moment, it goes into the breakdown and still building up the progression. Many thanks as always. Yeah, let's see what we got with those nights. This is a great vibe right from the start. Whether you played this or found a loop or sample that did that, I mean, it's working right there. Great groove going on here too.
It was one of those nights I was feeling kind of lethargic, and I knew I shouldn't went to that place at all, but whatever was in my mind, my body pushed those thoughts aside because it just wanted to dance. It just wanted to fly.
So I'm hearing a little bit of wonkiness in the vocal. It might be due to some like warping or sampling. If you're warping it, check to make sure that you're on complex mode and not one of the beats mode, because it sounds like it's got that time stretching that happens when on a beats mode in Ableton.
Tulips and paisley skies. Was it that time to trip? Or was I just high on the sound of the speaker that was coming out the wall? Or was this just another dream? Am I even here at all?
The vocal is a little bit lost to me in this mix. I would just bring it up in volume a small bit and then add something like the Slate Digital Fresh Air to bring out a lot of the presence and intelligibility of that vocal.
My lungs, but no one seems to hear me. Maybe the music was just too loud, or maybe they just fear me and
So in this section, I like what you've done here. I think it might be worth exploring like a little bit more of like a B or a C section thing, where it's not just a small deviation on the pattern that you had, but an entirely new section. Maybe bring in some horns, bring in just like an entirely different sort of feel and progression temporarily, once that vocal kind of stops. The beat that you've got has just been kind of playing for such a long time, and it's so good that we need to also give the listener a break from it so that we can then come back to it later on and make it that much more impactful near the end of the song. But if we keep it playing throughout these entire 2 minutes and stuff, we lose a degree of the specialness and impact of that particular beat and riff. Nice work here. Awesome. Yeah, really great vibe here. Let's give it up for Maxwell with Those Nights. Up next, I've got a track coming from Mr. Jeff out of our Accelerator program. He said, hey, Neil wrote this song recently. The background Foley hits, car alarm, and the vibe of the chords are supposed to tell a story throughout the song. Curious about your thought on if the story concept works. I also made all of my drums except the clap out of car Foley hits. Nice. Was hoping you could listen to as much of it as you can, but I do get it's a long song. Also curious if you think the first drop is missing something. Second drop has a lot more energy and hope you enjoy. All right, let's see what we got with Accidental. Definitely a good job setting the stage for now. I would say, like, from the start, the story, feeling is definitely there. There might be just a tiny bit too much detune going on your pad layers in the background. A little bit's good because it gives us that kind of like wonky ebb and flow against the piano. I think it's just a tiny bit too strong. Really cool use of those car sounds. I do think they get to be a little bit too loud for this one moment. You can still get that point across with them just being a tiny bit quieter. That, or you really need to lean into it and make it even louder while the music fades and like build up to that car crash hit. You definitely do a good job painting the story here. Got some like nice build-in energy, this kind of like mellow chord progression in the background, and then I love this like siren kind of echoing out. You can like really feel like an accident just happened there. So really nice work telling the story with your full length. Really cool drop. I wouldn't say anything is lacking in this drop. We've been coming out of like such a like low energy section that this is honestly like the perfect jump at this part. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this. I do think that the reverb is just a little bit too dominant in the mix, particularly in like the 300 to 400 hertz range, or I guess 100 to 400 hertz. So maybe just shelf down a little bit of the low end body of the reverb and let the top end air out, or kind of bring out a little bit more as is. Nice, really great work here, Jeff. Big fan of the vibe that you've created. I think it's all definitely working in your favor. Sweet. Up next, we got a track submission from Michael out of our Accelerator program, and he's saying, "Hey Neil, together with a friend of mine who is also a DJ, we made this somewhat underground clubhouse track. This is normally not the genre I produce. I would really like some general feedback on how we did it. How was the start of the track building towards the first drop? I would also like some feedback on the drop itself. By the way, I can recommend anyone to work together with another producer or DJ. It's fun and helps to explore new territories. Completely second that. Collaboration is a fantastic way to improve and learn. There are so many different tools, techniques, and tricks and stuff in production that kind of no matter who you work with, it's pretty likely that you'll learn at least one new trick." So anyways, yeah, let's see what we got going on with Deep Blue Boys. I got what I want. Nice vibe to start. So one of two things. I would either like keep that pad layer out for a little bit longer, or just don't take it out at all and let it continue to play. Now personally, I was a fan of the space that you created with it. So you know what? The final thing that you could do is like sit on that silence for just a little bit longer, and then when you come back in with that pad layer again, consider bringing in like a bass line or something else as well to help just renew like an extra sense of energy in there. Oh, sorry, Jeff. I just saw your message in the chat. Yeah, if we've got time at the end, I'll circle back to your second drop there.
I got what I want.
Really cool underground club feel to this for sure. I do think we need a little bit more just low end power in general across this between the sub end of the kick and then our basses. It's just sitting a little bit too quietly. I do want to acknowledge what Slick Willie D just said in the chat though. The presence on that low end is really nice. I can hear like the tonality of it. Just on my subwoofer, I'm not quite feeling the degree of groove and energy I'd be looking for. What I do about this track, I think, honestly, from an underground club perspective, this track is working really, really nicely. What I'd focus on is really just more of the mix. The drums themselves feel just a tiny bit thin, and they could use some extra saturation and texture, maybe a tiny bit of parallel compression to help thicken them up as well. And then for this main mid-range synth hit that you've got playing on that dotted eighth note beat, I would probably recommend saturating that a little bit further as well, and maybe bringing out a little bit of top-end energy to it with the high-end coloring EQ. I wouldn't open up the filter and make it super bitey by any means, but just giving it a little bit more of that thickness and presence I think would help drive this track a little further. Cool, really nice work here. Let's give it up for Michael and the Deep Blue Boys with I Got What I Want. Up next, I've got a track submission coming from Hussein out of our Radio Ready program, looking for just some general feedback. So let's see what we've got with Mentally Strong. I'm playing the audio file. Try that one more time. There we go. Really nice start to this track. I do think that this guitar is just a little bit too loud relative to everything else, so I'll just dial back the volume of the guitar a few decibels. Textures that you've got on here are really interesting, really, really strong. I just think they're a little too loud in that kind of upper mid range. So dial back the volume of all these guitar elements and these kind of flowing elements by probably 5 to 7 decibels. Just down just a little further. And then that'll allow the kick, the drums, the bass to kind of fill up a little bit more relative space. The other thing, I think the reason this will work totally fine is you've got a really nice sense of stereo width and texture in a lot of those elements. So even if you take down the volume of that guitar and all of these cool ear candy effects bits and stuff of the sorts, it's only going to be coming down on the side. So we'll still hear them really clearly because your bass and your kick and your drums are right in the center. So they'll kind of remain independent of each other no matter what you do volume-wise. So it'll just help, again, that kick, bass, and drums get a little bit more thickness and presence. So on top of turning down that volume, I would also increase the volume of the kick, bass, and drums just a little bit. Cool. All right. Getting some suggestions in the chat as well for a little bit more presence on the kick. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And then maybe adding a vocal on top. I do agree that could be pretty nice. So yeah, really, really nice work overall on this track here. So let's give it up for that was Hussein with Mentally Strong. Up next, we got a track from Steve out of our Accelerator program. He's looking for feedback from about 150 and on with any tips on general composition, the mix of the bass and low end, and the mix in general, please. Yeah, let's see what we got going on. So, Places by Neviside, 150. Nice work with the drums as a whole. I think that you could get a little bit more dynamic range and separation among those drums. So if you've got a transient shaper, just increasing the attack and decreasing the sustain just a little bit would help. If you don't have a transient shaper, then I would apply a compressor with like a 40 to 50 millisecond attack and probably like a 50 to 70 millisecond release time. That should help emphasize the transients just a little bit further. Your low end is sounding pretty good. You've got a good relationship between the kick and the bass. There is just a tiny bit of muddiness that's been introduced there around, like, I want to say 110 hertz listening to it. So in the bass line, you could probably just cut out a tiny bit of information around there because the kick is carrying enough of that power at that moment. I would agree with Yaniv's comment. The kick does feel like it's a little bit distant, so maybe adding a little bit of a high-end EQ boost to that kick to help it cut through the mix just a little further.
Places and spaces I've been. Places and spaces I've been.
Really nice transition and breakdown here with the vocal coming back in. You might be able to get a little bit more airiness and presence out of that vocal using a tool like Fresh Air by Slate Digital. I'd like a little bit more presence and body on this, like, bam, 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 like the guitar chord that answers the violins. Really nice work on this drop. The biggest thing I would say is just focus on creating a little bit more presence in all of your responses in your melody. So you have like this constant call and response going on between your elements. The strings sound pretty good, but everything that answers them could come up a little bit more in presence in the mix. All right, really nice work there, Steve. Up next, who do I have? I've got a track submission coming from Diego out of our Accelerator program. And Diego's saying that this is a work in progress track. Any feedback at around 120 and 245 till 345, and then 420 on the second short break. Okay, yeah, let's skip around and see what we got going on with Casanova's new track ID. Head to like 120-ish. Great groove going on here. There's a little bit of like tension going on between the top end notes of that like pad layer that you've got, this mid-range bassoon pad-like layer that you've got, and then the notes of the bass line. It might be intentional, and if so, then it's working great like it is, creating a really, really like strong sense of tension there. If you want something that's a little bit more calming and dancey, excuse me, I would probably recommend switching up the notes of your bass line a little bit to match the notes of your pads more closely. Like it sounds like the bass line's just like consistently one note too low. All right, let's jump ahead and see what we got going on that 245 till 355 section. Nice transition into emptiness. I do think that that violin swell that could come up in volume a decent amount. Really, really nice use of empty space going on here. This mid-range kind of fluttery layer is creating a lot of tonal tension against the strings. Again, if that's your intention, then you're doing a great job with it. If you do want something that's a little bit more smooth and pleasing to the ear, then I would just kind of recommend messing with the notes of this layer that's been pulsing throughout this break. See if you can get it to gel a little bit more closely with the, key and the notes of the rest of your track. I would suggest a little bit more of like a mini fill or a riser, like even like an FX noise sweep leading up into that transition moment. I think would work really nicely there. And let's check out this 420, this second short break. Really cool moment right there. I do think that the reverb was a little bit too wet on that element at that time, so I would just dial back some of that reverb or sidechain it against the little effect that's going on there, and I think that should help out. As a whole, really cool dark vibe, great groove, great use of that minimalist space as a whole. All right, let's give it up for Diego. Up next, whoops, we've got a track coming from Ben out of our Accelerator program, and he's looking for feedback just around 125. So let's see what we got with This Love. So good composition going on here. I think that the effects on the vocal are a little bit too pronounced. I would just dial back the wet, dry wet of some of those so that we get a little bit more of that original vocal flavor back. If you do want to bring this texture out, then what I would recommend doing is have the original vocal as is, use this layer and spread it nice and wide, and have it kind of be as like a doubled phasey sort of layer that comes in on top of the cleaner lead. That was a really cool drop. I was not expecting that in a really great way. One thing I'm noticing in this drop is there are a couple of moments between the bass and the percussion that they're not quite tightly aligned in terms of the groove. They're really, really close, but there's just a little bit of like a flammy looseness at times. I would just zoom in and make sure that your transients among those layers are really tightly aligned. Yeah, Ben, the other thing I'd say is, like, I see in your SoundCloud, you're saying you're on Module 3 in the Accelerator, so comments regarding 1, 2, and 3 would be cool, but welcome to all feedback. I think, from that perspective, those first 3 modules, for those of you guys who don't know, we're focused on, like, creating the core idea, finding the right sounds, getting the general gist of it in there, but not really focused too much on mixing quite yet. Ben, from that perspective, I think you've done a really, really great job. I think compositionally, this is where it needs to be. Sound selection wise, you're in a good spot. The majority of what you'll need to focus on here moving forward is just polishing up that mix. So giving us a little bit more space and separation between the elements by saturating some elements and such as the bass line, and leaving other ones such as your background pads and atmospheres a little bit thinner. But as a whole, I think you've done a really, really good job here. So let's give it up for Ben with This Love. Up next, I've got a track submission from Dan Westlake. Out of our Radio Ready program. And Dan is saying, this is my third crack at this track. I've replaced the 808 bass with a square wave. As usual, my main concern is whether the bass has the correct volume, weight, and depth in relation to the drums. Looking for feedback on the 128 stripped down section and the 328 full section. Yeah, so let's see what we've got with Push the Button. Alright, so let's jump ahead to 128. I think this bass line is working quite well this go around. one thing I think you could do actually is bring up a little bit more low end in the kick drum. I think your bass line, it has a really, really solid sense of weight, and it's mixed in nicely with everything else. But the power of the sub of the bass is a little bit stronger than the power of the sub of the kick. We want that to be reversed. So rather than bringing down the bass, I would just bring up the low end of the kick a small bit. Really nice riding, great composition and groove going on here. Skip ahead to that 328 section to see what's going on there. You know, one thing that might be worth trying is revoicing the piano chords, taking the top note of that piano chord and just pitching it down an octave. That'll create just a little bit more space for the vocal, and it'll give us a little bit more warmth and body in the track. I can't guarantee that that'll work out, but I have a feeling that that'll help out. And I'd lastly love just a little bit more saturation on these horns, just because it is our most tangible melodic element that we've had, like even more so than the vocal, which has a decent amount of like reverb and wash to it. So I would just bring that up a tiny bit with some extra thickness. All right, really nice work here, Dan. Let's give it up for him with Push the Button. I think you found the bass line and combination that's going to work for this track. All right, so up next, and it does look like we will have time to check out Jono's track as well, so let me cue that in. And then, Jeff, I think we'll have time to give your second drop a quick listen as well, so let me cue that back in. We'll just give that a quick check, then we'll get back. I'll tell you what, we'll go, up next, we'll go with Tim, because he is queued up, and then we'll check out Jeff's second drop really quickly, and then we'll finish things off with Jono's track as a whole. So Tim is coming from our Radio Ready program, and he's saying, thank you as always, late to the party as always. Here's my first part of my Hypnotic remix entry. I'm just about to start mixing properly on the whole track. So everything I chuck down the center at the moment is the bass too much. I'm pretty sure this is the same track that we've cleared that we've confirmed has clearing permission. I'm going to start playing it, and if I don't recognize it, I will pause it, but I'm pretty sure we have permission to play this one. Cool, so really good compositional start. I'm gonna bump up our volume a little further. So the biggest thing that I'm noticing here so far, Tim, is that we've got a little bit too much stereo width, specifically on the vocals. We're getting a little bit of like a phasing relationship between them, where they're almost kind of surrounding our head in the mix as opposed to coming out in front of us with the rest of the elements. So I would just narrow some of that vocal effect just a little bit. Nice percussion in the center. I think those are working well. Cool. Really nice riding here. I would recommend bringing up the kick and the drums in general across the board at volume. The kick is just tucked a little bit too far back in the mix in particular. Cool, really cool drop here. I love that sound of that bass. Same thing though, I would narrow it out just a little bit with the stereo imager. And I'm seeing in the chat you mentioned, it's probably the sample on that vocal that was causing the issue. If it is the sample, the fix, I would still just recommend, take the ozone imager or like some sort of free imaging plugin and just narrow that out a little bit so that it's not quite as wide. Yeah, as a whole, I think that's working really, really nicely. The biggest thing has to do with that stereo width and our sense of depth. So, like I said earlier, also focus on bringing out a little bit more presence in those drums through some extra saturation, volume, and maybe a little bit of a high-end coloring EQ boost. All right, so let's see what we had going on with Jeff's second drop here. We'll play that. Jeff, as a whole, I'd say this drop is working. The first thing that I'm noticing is that the vocal is a little bit lost thanks to this new rhythmic chord element, and I don't think that was here earlier. Yeah, so this new rhythmic chord element that you have is actually taking up a lot of space. So I would recommend sidechaining it against the vocal so that the vocal still maintains priority there. And then maybe taking out a little bit of high end of that new rhythmic chord progression just to make sure that we have enough space for the vocal, drums, and that main lead. Otherwise, I think this second drop's working really nicely. I love that new percussion riff that you've got coming in here. Yeah, so nice work there, Jeff. All right, so to wrap things up for today, we've got a track submission from Jono out of our Radio Ready program, and he's looking for general feedback. He's saying it needs a vocal to fully complement the frequency range and give it some emotion, but mostly looking for mixing feedback as always. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, let's see what we've got going on here with Forever Lonely. Great start, great use of effects. I would say that the effects are a little bit loud compared to the piano, so either turn down the effects. Actually, I would say probably turn down the effects a little bit and then also bring up that lower piano just a little bit in volume. And then you could probably turn down a little bit of the volume of that top end kind of clicky piano that's come in. We're just lacking a little bit of like the tonality and body and have almost too much of that top end texture going on here. And then leading up to this drop, I would actually get rid of that lower piano almost altogether, filter out a lot of the low end of the other pianos and kind of shift us up to a higher set of frequencies, even more so than what you've currently got. And that way, when the bass, the kick, and then the lower piano come back in the drop, it'll feel a little bit more impactful and energetic. Yeah, compositionally in the rest of your mix, everything is working really nicely. I think it's just you need to rebalance the piano so that the lower one has more presence and body, and the higher one is more of just kind of an accent on top of that. Love the drone note string going on here. That's working really nicely. Yeah, I've seen you ask if the bass is okay. I do think the bass is okay. I'll listen to it again in this next drop to make sure, but I'm pretty sure it's working well. Yeah, I was going to say, if anything, there might be a little too much of it, but we'll find out in a second. So, Jono, my take on the bass, I think you're okay, but that might change once you bring up that lower piano. You might be able to like lower the bass just a small bit by bringing up some more low mid intonations from the piano. Otherwise, I'd say everything here is working really nicely. The final thing I'd say is maybe bring out like the melody notes of that piano just a little bit more, like the da 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 da. Just bring that particular part a little bit further in the piano, and I think that should make you golden here. All right, so let's give it up for Jono, and with that, we are at the end of today's stream. So thank you guys very much for tuning in and for adding your comments in the chat. Been another great session as always. So, for those of you again watching who are interested in getting feedback on your tracks, I do recommend checking out the Radio Ready program and the EDM Tips Accelerator, both of which you can learn more about using the link below in the description of this video. Through that link, you'll be able to have a chance to set up a completely free phone call with one of our team members and just decide whether or not it's a good fit for you. So there's no obligation whatsoever to explore it a little bit further. We always love bringing new folks on and love helping you guys get results. So keep up all the hard work to all of the students who have been going at it so far. And if you guys are on the fence, I do encourage you to just at least poke your head and see what it's about, see if it is indeed a good fit for you. All right, and with that, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you all have a great rest of your week ahead, and I look forward to catching a lot of you around in the Facebook groups. Cheers, everyone.